If you don't like living with family, you can leave, my uncle said. I paid $11,400 in monthly bills while they lived rent-free in my home for 10 months. I cooked, cleaned, even gave up my office for my cousin. When I asked for space, he said, "We're your family. Act like it." That night, I slept in my car. At dawn, I made a single transfer. He didn't know it, but he had just signed his own way out. I stood there dripping wet, grocery bags cutting into my fingers, trying to keep my balance on the slippery stoop. My name's Ethan. I'm 28 years old and I live in Syracuse, New York. It had been raining since noon, and my jacket was soaked through. I'd stopped by the store on the way home, hoping to make dinner a little easier for my uncle and his family. I shifted my weight, the cold seeping into my skin. My uncle, Frank, was standing in the doorway, arms crossed like he'd been waiting for me. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me, at the bags in my hands, at the water pooling around my shoes. Finally, he said, "If you don't like living here, you can leave." His voice was calm, almost casual, but the words hit me like a punch to the gut. I blinked, my brain trying to catch up. I just brought some groceries," I stammered. My arms ached from the weight of the bags. I tried to shift them again, hoping he'd see that I was doing my part. Frank didn't budge. "You think that makes you special? You think bringing home a few bags of food means you're owed something?" He shook his head like I was some slow learner. "You've got a choice, Ethan. You're either in or you're out." I stood there, feeling the rain drip down the back of my neck. My clothes were clinging to me, cold and heavy. Part of me wanted to argue, to tell him how hard I'd been working, how much I'd sacrificed, but the words caught in my throat. I looked past him into the kitchen, saw my cousin Alex with his feet up on the table, playing a game on his phone. My aunt was at the counter, scrolling through her Facebook feed, completely uninterested in me. I just thought. I started, but the rest of the sentence fell away. What was the point? I already knew they didn't care. Frank raised an eyebrow. "You thought what? That we'd thank you for doing what you're supposed to do? Don't get it twisted, Ethan. You're not owed a damn thing." I looked at the floor, at the water dripping off the hem of my jeans. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. I swallowed hard, tasting the bitterness of it all. "All right," I said quietly. Frank watched me for another long moment. Then he stepped aside and let me in. I carried the bags to the kitchen, trying not to slip on the linoleum. I unpacked them one by one, pasta, bread, eggs, stacking them neatly on the counter. My aunt didn't say a word. Alex didn't even look up. When I was done, I wiped my wet hands on my jeans and took a deep breath. "Dinner's in the fridge," I said. Nobody answered. Frank just went back to his chair, flipping channels on the TV like nothing had happened. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep in my room. I grabbed my keys, slipped out the back door, and climbed into my car. I leaned the seat back and pulled an old blanket around my shoulders, feeling like I was floating outside of my own life. I thought about how I'd ended up here, how I'd given up my apartment, my quiet evenings, my space, because family was supposed to be worth it. But standing in that kitchen, dripping wet, I realized they saw me as nothing more than a tenant who hadn't paid enough to stay. The rain tapped on the windshield, steady and soft. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. If I was going to be invisible, at least out here I could be invisible on my own terms. And in that moment, I decided this was the last night I'd let them make me feel like an intruder in my own life. I spent the next morning in my car, the rain still pattering softly on the roof. My phone buzzed a couple of times with work emails, but I ignored them. My thoughts were too heavy, like they'd been sitting in the pit of my stomach for months. I started making a mental list. 10 months. 10 months of paying bills, doing chores, and staying quiet. I'd spent $11,400, down to the last dime, just to keep that apartment running. Rent, groceries, internet. Even the electric bill I'd covered more than once when Frank said money was a little tight. I remembered how my home office had turned into Alex's gaming den overnight. My desk was pushed into the hallway so he could set up 3 monitors and a big neon sign that read Victory Lane. I'd stood in the doorway once, taking it all in, and Alex had just said, "Yeah, I'll give you your chair back when I'm done." That was 3 months ago. He still hadn't given it back. I'd watched my aunt, Cheryl, turn the kitchen into her personal decorating project. New curtains, new dishware, even a little fancy sign that said, "Bless this mess," over the sink. She never asked if it was okay. She just did it, like it was her house, not mine. I paid for every bit of it. My paycheck was stretched thin with every little thing they needed. I didn't complain. At first, I told myself it was family, that I could handle it, that helping out was what you did. But it wasn't helping out anymore. It was funding their lives while mine shrank to nothing. I leaned back in my seat, staring up at the gray sky. The wipers made a slow, squeaky pass across the glass, and I thought about how it all started. About how Frank had said, It'll be good for you. You'll be part of the family again. Part of the family. I laughed bitterly at that now. Family meant I was supposed to eat dinner with them in the living room, even when they ordered takeout and left me to cook my own meal. Family meant I was supposed to say sure when Alex asked to borrow my car and returned it with an empty tank. I thought about the times I tried to speak up. Once, I asked Frank if Alex could at least pick up after himself. The next morning, there was a note on the fridge in Cheryl's handwriting. We're a family here, not a boarding house. Like I was the problem for wanting a clean sink. Another time, I asked Cheryl if she could help out with the groceries. She looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. You're working full-time, Ethan. It's not like you can't afford it. Then she laughed and went back to scrolling on her phone. The worst part was how they all laughed when I tried to draw a line. Frank, Alex, even Cheryl. They thought it was funny when I said I needed my own space. Don't be so sensitive, Ethan, Cheryl would say. We're all family here. But deep down, I knew I wasn't family. I was a paycheck. I was a dishwasher. I was the guy who paid the bills and kept his mouth shut. I stared at my hands, the lines of my palms suddenly looking like roads leading nowhere. My loyalty had become a prison, and I'd let it happen because I wanted to believe in something that wasn't real. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the payment history. Every charge, every rent check, every transfer. I added it all up, and the number stared back at me like an accusation. $11,400. 10 months of silence. 10 months of giving without a thank you. 10 months of being invisible. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. My mind was racing, but for the first time, it felt clear. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep paying for a place that wasn't home. I thought about what my next move would be, how I could get out. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something I'd been too afraid to see. And once I saw it, there was no going back. I started the car and drove away from the apartment, the rain easing up as I pulled onto the main road. My heart felt lighter with every mile, because now I knew they weren't going to change, but I could, and I would. The next day, I tried to push it all out of my head. I told myself to focus on work, on my deadlines, on anything but the way my uncle's words had felt like a slap in the face. But that night, as I settled into the chair in my car, my makeshift bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the money, the groceries, the unspoken rules that had kept me quiet. I decided to try again, to see if I could salvage something. Maybe start small, like asking for my charger back. I walked back into the apartment early the next morning, my phone almost dead from the night before. My cousin Alex was on the couch, propped up with a blanket and a bowl of cereal balanced on his stomach, scrolling on his phone like he had no worries in the world. Hey, I said, clearing my throat. Can I get my charger back? My phone's about to die. Alex didn't even look up. I'm using it, he mumbled, his eyes locked on the screen. It's mine, though, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I need it for work. Chill out, he said, still not looking at me. I'll give it back later. Alex, I said, taking a step closer, I really need it now. He finally looked up, his expression annoyed. Dude, can you just stop? I'm under a lot of pressure right now. His voice was so casual, like he was the one holding the world up. You're always making a big deal out of nothing. Before I could say another word, Cheryl walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She glanced at us and sighed. Ethan, let him be. Alex has been really stressed lately. I stared at her, my jaw clenching. I'm stressed too, I said, my voice low. I have to work in the morning, and I need that charger. She shook her head like I was being unreasonable. You're always so quick to pick a fight, she said, turning back into the kitchen. Why can't you just let it go for once? I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her dismissal. Then I turned away and walked out of the apartment, back to the quiet of my car. I scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself. That's when I saw it, a new photo on Cheryl's social media feed. It was the whole family, Frank, Cheryl, Alex, crowded around my grill, my patio furniture, plates loaded with food I'd bought. They were all smiling, raising their drinks like it was some perfect summer night. The caption read, "Family is everything." I stared at the photo, my thumb frozen on the screen. Family is everything. And there I was absent, like I'd never been there at all. I felt my stomach twist. My grill, my groceries, my apartment, and not one of them had thought to invite me. I closed the app and leaned my head back against the seat. My heart was racing, my chest tight. It wasn't just the charger. It wasn't just the groceries. It was everything. I'd spent 10 months trying to prove I was part of the family. 10 months of paying the bills, doing the chores, staying out of the way. And in the end, I wasn't even a footnote in their perfect little picture. For the first time, I realized it wasn't about me not trying hard enough. It was about them never seeing me at all. I looked out the windshield at the empty parking lot. My breath fogged the glass, and I watched it fade, then come back again. I thought about all the nights I'd spent tiptoeing around them, all the money I'd spent just to be allowed to stay. And I knew in that moment that something had to change. I wasn't going to be the invisible man in someone else's story anymore. I sat there in the dark, the glow of my phone screen fading, and felt something shift in my chest. The first crack in the wall I'd built to keep my head down. The first crack that would let the truth in. And once it started, there was no stopping it. I spent the next couple of days going through everything, every receipt, every bank statement, every text. I wanted to know exactly how deep it went, how much they'd taken from me without ever saying thank you. I started with my bank app. I scrolled back through months of transfers, rent, groceries, utilities. Each line felt like another betrayal. I screenshotted every one, saving them into a folder labeled evidence. I didn't even know what I was going to do with it yet, but I needed to see it all laid out, to make it real. Then I went back through my text with Cheryl. Every, "Can you cover this?" and "We'll pay you back," promise, stacked up like a tower of lies. I screenshotted them too. I found a voice note I'd almost forgotten, Cheryl talking to Frank late at night. She didn't know I'd been in the hallway, close enough to hear. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. "Ethan's working a lot. Just use his money for the project. He won't say anything." My throat tightened as I listened to it again, the words slicing through me like a cold knife. My money, my name, like I was just a tool they could use to build their lives. I dug deeper, pulling up Alex's crypto accounts he'd opened in my name without asking. He'd told me it was just a test, something he'd figure out later. But there were real charges there, real money he'd risked. My money. I screenshotted it all, my hands shaking. The final straw came from the family group chat. I hadn't looked at it in weeks, but when I did, I saw the picture they'd posted. It was me, asleep on the couch, head tilted back and mouth half open. Someone had added a laughing emoji. Our freeloader, Cheryl, had written, "He doesn't even know how easy he has it." I stared at that picture until my vision went blurry. They thought I was weak, that I'd never stand up for myself, that I'd always just keep giving. But sitting there in my car, surrounded by all this proof, I felt something in me go quiet, a kind of cold, deliberate calm. I knew what I had to do. I didn't yell. I didn't confront them outright. That wasn't going to get me anywhere. They'd just twist it back on me like they always did. No, I was going to do this on my terms. I organized every screenshot, every recording, every receipt. I made a spreadsheet with dates and totals. I even backed it all up on a flash drive, just in case. When I was done, I looked at the stack of evidence and realized it wasn't just numbers. It was the truth, my truth, and they couldn't deny it. I sat back in my seat, my fingers tapping on the wheel. My chest felt tight, but for the first time in months, it wasn't from fear. It was from certainty. They'd spent 10 months laughing behind my back, calling me a freeloader. But now, I had the proof. I had the receipts, and I was done being their silent ATM. I didn't know exactly how it would end yet, but I knew it started now, quietly, with a plan. Because if they thought I was too weak to fight back, they were about to see just how wrong they'd been. A week later, I woke up to an email from the tenant board. The subject line made my stomach drop. Complaint notice, alleged overcrowding and verbal abuse. I sat there in the driver's seat of my car, the words blurring together as I read them again and again. Overcrowding? Verbal abuse? My hands were shaking. I took a breath, trying to steady them as I scrolled down. There it was, clear as day, an anonymous report filed in the middle of the night, accusing me of creating an unsafe environment, of harassing other tenants. My first thought was that it was a mistake, some neighbor who'd gotten the wrong apartment. But the more I read, the clearer it became. This was deliberate. This was personal. I knew exactly who did it. My cousin Alex. The same Alex who still had my charger, who'd turned my office into his gaming den. He had filed this complaint while I was sleeping in my car. I traced the IP address listed in the report. It wasn't hard. I knew the Wi-Fi in the apartment, the one I paid for every month. I'd always let Alex use it, even when he said he needed it for work. My own generosity had given him the weapon he used to stab me in the back. I sat there for a long time, the rain tapping lightly on the windshield. My fingers were cold, but my mind was buzzing. It wasn't just a slap in the face anymore. It was war. I pulled out the lease I'd kept stashed in my glove compartment. My name was the only one on it. No one else had the right to stay there. Not legally, not financially. I flipped through it, page after page, reminding myself that this was my place, my responsibility. Then I went to my bank statements, pulling every payment I'd made. Rent, electric, internet. I printed them out at the office supply store down the street, feeling a strange, quiet satisfaction as the pages stacked up. Proof, cold and precise. When I was done, I took it all to my friend Ben. He'd been a lawyer before he moved into private consulting. He owed me a favor, and I knew he'd help me if I asked. Ben looked through the stack, his eyes narrowing as he read the complaint. This is total bullshit, he said finally, shaking his head. They don't have a leg to stand on. I nodded, but I didn't smile. I know, I said, but I want to make sure. I want them to see how serious I am. Vin didn't even blink. We'll draft a response. I'll send you a copy by tomorrow. He paused, then looked at me. You sure you're ready for this? I nodded. I'm done playing nice. Back at my car, I backed everything up on a flash drive, in the cloud, even in a locked file on my phone. I wasn't going to let them twist this into something it wasn't. Not this time. I thought about Alex, sitting in that apartment he thought was his. About Cheryl, decorating a kitchen she didn't own. About Frank, arms crossed, telling me to leave if I didn't like it. I was done being the guy who kept paying while they laughed at me behind my back. That night, I sent them one message, no anger, no apology, just a simple note. I know what you did, and I'm ready to prove it. It wasn't about the complaint anymore. It was about showing them that I wasn't going to be their silent scapegoat. Not anymore. They'd underestimated me, but they were about to see just how wrong they'd been. I woke up early that morning, my heart pounding in my chest like it knew what was coming. The landlord had texted me the night before, telling me the housing officer and a city official would be there at 9 sharp. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't feel tired. I felt ready. I parked my car a few blocks away so I could walk up to the building on my own terms. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that felt heavy, but it didn't bother me. My shoulders were squared, my mind clear. When I walked in, Frank was already at the kitchen table, his arms folded like always. Cheryl was hovering behind him, fussing with a dish towel she wasn't really using. Alex was on the couch, earbuds in, but I could tell he was listening. The whole apartment smelled like stale coffee and something burnt in the oven. I nodded at them but didn't say a word. I sat down across from Frank and laid the lease on the table. My name at the top, clear as day. The doorbell rang and Cheryl flinched. Frank didn't move, so I stood and let them in. The landlord was a short guy in his 60s, balding and serious. The housing officer, a woman with a clipboard, gave me a polite nod. The city official, a tall man in a navy suit, didn't smile. Good morning, the landlord said. We're here to resolve this complaint. Alex's head shot up. Cheryl's eyes darted between me and the officials. Frank's jaw tightened. I cleared my throat. I'm Ethan. I'm the only legal tenant here, I said calmly. I opened the lease, sliding it across the table for them to see. They're all here without permission. They don't pay rent. They're not on the lease. The housing officer raised an eyebrow. You have the bank statements to prove this? I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder. Every payment, every grocery bill, every utility in my name. I laid it all out on the table, page by page. Frank didn't say a word, but his face went red. Cheryl's mouth opened like she was about to speak, but she didn't. The landlord flipped through the papers, his lips pressing together. This is very thorough, he said quietly. More than enough to confirm you're the sole tenant. The housing officer turned to Alex. Is it true you filed the complaint? She asked, her tone sharp. Alex swallowed. I didn't think. She cut him off. You used Ethan's own internet to do it. We traced the IP address. That's considered fraud. Alex's face went pale. Cheryl tried to jump in, her voice shaking. He didn't mean it. He was just stressed. No, I said, my voice flat. He meant it. He wanted me out. But I'm done. The city official looked at Frank. You and your family have 48 hours to vacate the premises, he said, his voice cold and official. This is not your residence. You have no legal claim to this apartment. Frank's face went blank. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me at all. Cheryl started crying softly, her shoulders shaking. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of 10 months of frustration roll off my shoulders. You said I could leave if I didn't like it, I said, my voice low but clear. Today, I am. For a moment, the room was dead silent. The only sound was the distant hum of the fridge and the rain starting to tap on the windows. Then the housing officer stood. We'll be back in 48 hours, she said. Have your things packed. Frank didn't say a word as they left. Cheryl wiped her eyes with the corner of her shirt. Alex slumped on the couch, staring at the floor. I stood up slowly, gathering my papers and sliding them back into my bag. My hands were steady, my heart strangely calm. When I reached the door, I turned to look at them one last time. Frank wouldn't meet my eyes. Cheryl's shoulders were still shaking. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. Just relief. Good luck, I said softly. Then I stepped out into the hallway and shut the door behind me. I walked down the stairs, each step feeling lighter than the last. For the first time in 10 months, I was free, and it felt like the world was finally opening up in front of me. 2 days later, I stood at the door of the apartment one last time. My key turned in the lock with a soft click, and I pushed it open to see the living room stripped bare. No more gaming chairs or tacky kitchen signs. No more piles of dishes in the sink or Alex's sneakers in the hallway. Just an empty room, still and quiet. I walked to the window and pulled the blinds up. Sunlight flooded in, warm and bright, and for the first time, it felt like it belonged to me. In my hand, I clutched the final piece of this mess. 3 monetary transfers. Pitiful amounts from Frank, Cheryl, and Alex, each a last-ditch attempt to pretend they had paid their share. $25 here, $100 there. Nothing close to what I'd spent. I took a deep breath and sat at the small dining table that had once been covered in half-eaten takeout containers. I opened my laptop and pulled up the document I'd spent all night perfecting, an invoice. It was cold and precise, no room for arguments or guilt. 10 months of rent, groceries, utilities, missed income, every dollar and cent I'd carried on my shoulders for them. I totaled it up at the bottom, $114,000. I attached the transfers as deductions, small credits that didn't even put a dent in the mountain of money I'd laid out for them. Then I wrote a simple note in the body of the email. This ends our legal, financial, and emotional contract. I hit send. It was like releasing a breath I'd been holding for months. My phone pinged almost immediately, but I didn't even look at the messages. I didn't care anymore. I transferred the money they had sent me, those few paltry payments, to a youth housing charity I'd found online the night before. I figured if I was going to let go of it, I wanted it to go somewhere it mattered, somewhere it would make a difference, not just patch up the holes in someone else's life. After that, I opened my messaging apps, one by one. Blocked Frank, blocked Cheryl, blocked Alex. I deleted the last family group chat. No more updates, no more guilt, no more pretending. The apartment was mine again, quiet and empty. The air felt clearer, like I could finally breathe. I walked out to the small balcony, the one they'd always used to host barbecues with my grill and my groceries. The sun was bright overhead, the city humming softly in the distance. I leaned on the railing, feeling the warm metal under my hands. For a long time, I stood there in silence. I thought about how it all began, how I'd come here hoping to be part of a family, how I'd given everything, my money, my time, my peace of mind, just to feel like I belonged, and how in the end, they'd show me that loyalty without respect is just another word for being used. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. As I stood there, I made a quiet promise to myself that I would never let anyone treat me like that again, that I would never trade my worth for someone else's comfort. This was my home now, my space, my life, and it was finally, truly mine. I turned to go back inside, my heart light. I knew there would be more to figure out in the days ahead, how to rebuild, how to move forward, but for now, I was at peace. And for the first time in 10 months, that was enough.